The rifle shot cracked across the canyon, echoing off limestone walls like judgment itself. Nathaniel Hale stood frozen in his own yard, watching the woman he'd married 3 weeks ago aim his Winchester at the horizon. Her dark hair whipped wild in the wind. Her calico dress pressed flat against her frame. She fired again, the recoil barely moving her shoulder. "What in God's name are you doing?" he shouted. She lowered the rifle and turned to face him. Her eyes were storm gray and unapologetic. "Keeping us alive." That was not the woman he'd advertised for. That was not the woman whose letters had promised silence and obedience and a gentle presence in his quiet Montana home. That was 3 weeks ago. It started 2 months earlier, when Nathaniel finally broke down and placed the advertisement. He was 37 years old, built like an ox from a decade of ranch work, and tired of cooking his own meals in the stillness of a house that felt more like a tomb than a home. Seeking a wife, he wrote carefully at the mercantile counter. Must be quiet-natured and content with solitude. Ranch life in Montana Territory. No children. Companionship and simple partnership desired. Write to Nathaniel Hale, Bitterroot Station. The clerk read it over his shoulder. "Quiet-natured," he said with a smirk. "Good luck finding the—" Nathaniel ignored him. He had his reasons. The war had filled his ears with screaming, men dying, artillery thundering, officers shouting orders that made no sense. When he came home, the only thing that eased the ringing in his head was silence. Deep, unbroken silence. The kind only Montana's high country could offer. He built his ranch in a valley so remote that neighbors were a day's ride away. He ran cattle, cut timber, and spoke to no one but his horses for weeks at a time. It was exactly what he needed. But a man couldn't live that way forever. 3 letters came in response to his advertisement. 2 were from women who sounded desperate. The third was from Miss Catherine Merritt of St. Louis, Missouri. Her handwriting was neat and small. Her words carefully chosen. "I am 28 years old and accustomed to a quiet household. I read extensively and require little conversation. I am not given to displays of emotion. If you seek peace in your home, I believe I can provide it." It was perfect. They exchanged 2 more letters. She asked practical questions about the ranch, the weather, the supplies available in town. She did not ask about love or romance or whether he was handsome. She seemed, in every way, like exactly what he needed. He sent her money for the journey. She arrived on a Tuesday in late September. The stagecoach rolled into Bitterroot Station under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Nathaniel waited on the platform, hat in hand, heart pounding harder than it had since Antietam. The door opened. A woman stepped down. She was small, barely reaching his shoulder. Her traveling dress was gray and modest. Her hair was pinned so tightly it seemed to pull at her scalp. She carried one small trunk and a carpetbag, but it was her face that struck him, pale, composed, and utterly expressionless. Like a porcelain doll. "Mr. Hale?" she asked. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Miss Merritt." She offered her hand. It was cold and limp in his. "I trust the journey was tolerable," he said. It was adequate. They rode to the ranch in near silence. She sat stiffly beside him on the wagon bench, hands folded in her lap, eyes forward. She did not ask questions. She did not comment on the landscape. She simply existed. At the ranch, he showed her the house. She nodded at each room. "This will suffice," she said quietly. They were married the next morning by the circuit preacher. She spoke her vows in the same soft monotone. That night, she retired to the bedroom he'd prepared and closed the door without a word. For the first week, it was exactly what Nathaniel thought he wanted. Catherine moved through the house like a ghost. She cooked plain meals without complaint. She mended his shirts in. Silence. She asked for nothing. But something felt wrong. She never hummed while she worked. Never sighed. Never laughed or frowned or showed any sign that she felt anything at all. One evening, he came in from the barn to find her staring out the window, completely still. "Catherine," he said. She did not turn. "Yes." "Are you all right?" "I am adequate." That word again. Adequate. By the second week, the silence he'd craved began to feel suffocating. He found himself watching her, searching for some flicker of life beneath that placid surface. Then, on the morning of their 18th day of marriage, everything changed. Nathaniel woke to the sound of something crashing in the kitchen. He stumbled downstairs to find Catherine standing amid broken dishes, her chest heaving, her face flushed red. "I cannot do this," she said. Her voice was not soft anymore. It was raw and shaking. I cannot be this. She gestured at herself, at the neat dress, the perfect hair. This is not me. Nathaniel stared, and Catherine Merritt began to cry. She sank into the chair by the table, shoulders shaking, hands pressed over her face. The sound was terrible, not delicate tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed pulled from somewhere she'd kept locked for years. Nathaniel stood frozen. He had no idea what to do. I lied to you, she choked out between gasps. In my letters, I lied. He moved carefully, pulling out the chair across from her. About what? She lowered her hands. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face blotchy. About being quiet. About wanting silence. She laughed bitterly. I hate silence. It suffocates me. Nathaniel felt the ground shift beneath him. I grew up in a house where children were not permitted to speak unless spoken to, she continued, her voice steadier now, edged with anger. My father believed women should be ornamental and obedient. My mother died trying to be both. When I answered your advertisement, I thought I could be what you wanted. I thought I could make myself small enough to fit. She stood abruptly, pacing to the window. But I can't. I can't sit in this house day after day with nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat. I can't pretend I don't have thoughts or opinions or feelings. Nathaniel watched her silhouette against the morning light. She looked taller somehow, more solid. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I'll leave if you want me to. The words hung between them. Nathaniel thought about the silence he'd built his life around, the way it had protected him from the war's echoes, the way he'd convinced himself it was what he needed. But looking at Catherine now, messy and furious and alive, he realized something. He'd been asking for a corpse. I don't want you to leave, he said. She turned sharply. What? I don't want you to leave, he repeated. But I need to understand who you actually are. Her expression shifted, surprise, then caution. You might not like what you find. Try me. Over the next days, Catherine unraveled. She talked about books she'd read, ideas she'd had, frustrations she'd swallowed for years. She asked him questions about the ranch, about his past, about why he'd wanted quiet so desperately. He told her about the war, about the way noise still made his hands shake sometimes, about building this place as a refuge. But maybe, he admitted one evening, I've been hiding instead of healing. She looked at him across the table. Then maybe we can help each other. Slowly, they began again, this time without pretense. Catherine learned to shoot because she asked to. She learned to ride because she wanted freedom beyond the house. She sang while she worked, off-key and joyful, and Nathaniel found it didn't bother him the way he'd thought it would. She was loud and opinionated and fiercely intelligent. She challenged him when he was wrong, laughed at him when he was stubborn, and filled the house with an energy he'd forgotten could exist. And Nathaniel began to change too. He started talking more, sharing stories he'd kept buried. The nightmares came less often. The silence stopped feeling like safety and started feeling like loneliness. They were becoming partners. Real ones. Then, 3 weeks after Catherine's breakdown, riders appeared on the horizon. Nathaniel saw them from the barn. 3 men, moving fast. He didn't recognize them, but instinct told him they weren't friendly. He ran toward the house. Catherine, get inside. She stepped onto the porch instead, shading her eyes. Who are they? I don't know. Just go. The riders reached the yard. The leader dismounted, a thick-necked man with a federal badge pinned to his coat. Nathaniel Hale, he called. I am. The man pulled a folded paper from his jacket. I'm Marshal Doherty. I've got a warrant here for the return of one Catherine Merritt Hale to St. Louis. She's wanted for theft. Nathaniel's blood went cold. That's a lie. Her father filed the complaint, the marshal said. Says she stole money and property before fleeing west. I'm authorized to bring her back for trial. Catherine's face had gone white. But she didn't. Run. She stepped forward. The property he's referring to, she said clearly, is myself. And the money was my mother's inheritance, which he stole from me first. The marshal shrugged. That's for a judge to decide, ma'am. Come peacefully, or we'll take you by force. Nathaniel stepped between them. She's not going anywhere. You're interfering with federal business. I'm protecting my wife. The tension crackled like lightning before a storm. The other 2 riders shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward their gun belts. Catherine touched Nathaniel's arm. Don't, she whispered. They'll kill you. He looked down at her. This woman who'd arrived pretending to be silent and had instead set his entire world on fire. This woman who'd taught him that safety and life were not the same thing. Then I'll die trying, he said. Marshal Doherty's expression hardened. Last chance, Hale. Step aside. Nathaniel didn't move. The marshal nodded to his men. They dismounted, spreading out across the yard. One moved toward Catherine. Nathaniel's fist connected with the man's jaw before he got within 3 feet. The yard erupted. The second rider lunged at Nathaniel. They grappled in the dirt, fists flying. Nathaniel took a hard blow to the ribs, another to his temple. His vision blurred, but he kept fighting. The marshal grabbed Catherine's arm, yanking her toward his horse. She twisted, clawing at his face. Let go of me. That was when the rifle shot cracked across the canyon. Everyone froze. Catherine stood 5 feet away, Nathaniel's Winchester in her hands, smoke curling from the barrel. She'd fired into the air, but the weapon was now aimed squarely at the marshal's chest. You will take your hands off me, she said. Her voice didn't shake. The marshal released her slowly, raising his hands. You're making this worse. No, Catherine said. I'm making it clear. I am not going back to St. Louis. I am not property. And if you try to take me, someone will die today. Nathaniel pulled himself to his feet, wiping blood from his mouth. He stood beside Catherine, shoulder to shoulder. The marshal looked between them. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Nathaniel said. Because you're going to ride back to town and tell Judge Merritt what happened here. And I'm going to send a telegram to a federal attorney in Helena who owes me a favor from the war. He stepped closer. Catherine's father has no legal claim to her inheritance. She's married now. That money is hers by law. And if he wants to press charges for theft, we'll countersue for fraud and abuse. The marshal's jaw tightened. You've got no proof. I have this. Catherine reached into her pocket and pulled out a small leather journal. My mother's diary. Every entry for the last 5 years of her life, including the ones about how my father forged her signature to transfer her inheritance into his name, including the ones about how he beat her when she objected. She held it up. I took it when I left because I knew he'd come after me eventually. This is my proof, and I'll stand in any courtroom in the country and read it aloud. The silence stretched long and taut. Finally, the marshal exhaled. Your father's a powerful man. He's a bully, Catherine said. And bullies only win when people let them. Doherty looked at his men, then at Nathaniel and Catherine standing defiant in the dirt. After a long moment, he climbed back onto his horse. I'll deliver your message, he said. But if Judge Merritt wants to pursue this, he won't, Nathaniel interrupted. Because the attorney I'm contacting used to be a federal prosecutor, and he doesn't take kindly to men who abuse the law to terrorize women. The marshal tipped his hat coldly and turned his horse. The 3 riders left the way they came, dust rising behind them. Catherine lowered the rifle. Her hands finally began to shake. Nathaniel took the weapon gently and set it aside. Then he pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against him, the adrenaline draining out all at once. I'm sorry, she whispered. I brought this to your door. No, he said quietly. You brought yourself. That's all I wanted. They stood that way for a long time, the Montana wind moving around them like a benediction. That evening, they sat on the porch steps as the sun set behind the mountains. Nathaniel's ribs ached. Catherine's hands were still trembling slightly, but something had settled between them. I meant what I said, Nathaniel told her. We'll fight this, however long it takes. He might not give up. Neither will I. She leaned her head against his shoulder. You asked for a quiet wife. He smiled faintly. I was a fool. You were hiding. So were you. She nodded. I suppose we both were. The sky turned gold, then pink, then deep purple. Stars began to appear, scattered across the vastness like promises. I'm not quiet, Catherine said softly. I never will be. Nathaniel wrapped his arm around her. Good. 3 months later, a letter arrived from Helena. Judge Merritt had withdrawn his complaint after the federal attorney's office opened an investigation into his financial dealings. Catherine's inheritance had been legally transferred into her name. She was free. By then, winter had settled over the ranch. Snow lay thick across the valley. Inside the house, a fire burned warm. Catherine sat at the table writing letters, to a lawyer, to a women's suffrage organization, to other women who might need help escaping situations like hers. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, watching her work. The house was no longer quiet. It was filled with her voice, her laughter, her fierce determination to set the world right. It was filled with life. She looked up and caught him staring. What? Nothing, he said. Just thinking. About. He crossed the room and kissed the top of her head. About how lucky I am that you're a terrible liar. She laughed, bright and loud and completely unrestrained. Outside, the Montana wind howled across the frozen land. Inside, the war in Nathaniel's heart had finally ended. Not with silence, but with something far better. With love that refused to be quiet.